The foreclosure letter from Wells Fargo had been sitting on my counter for 9 days. I knew because I'd marked each morning with a coffee ring on the envelope, a stupid little ritual that made me feel like I was still in control of something. November 7th, 2019, 6014 in the morning. By Friday at noon, the bank would padlock the doors of the Honeysuckle Kitchen, the diner my grandmother opened on Route 11 outside Roanoke back in 1962. 57 years of biscuits and gravy, and I was about to be the one who let it die. I was wrapping Granny Pearl's cast iron skillet in an old flour sack towel when I heard the engine outside. Not the rattle of a pickup, not the whine of my regular Subarus. This was something else. I looked through the front window and saw a black Lincoln Navigator pull right up to the curb, the kind of vehicle that doesn't belong on a road where the speed limit signs are riddled with buckshot. A woman stepped out first, charcoal pantsuit, the kind that costs more than my rent. Behind her came a man in a navy overcoat, holding a leather portfolio under his arm. They walked toward my door like they already knew what they'd find inside. I should have locked up. I should have flipped the sign to closed and pretended I wasn't there. But I was too tired to run from anything anymore. So I poured myself another cup of coffee from the pot I'd been nursing since 4:30 and waited. The bell above the door chimed the way it always did, that little tin sound my grandfather had installed in 1965. The woman scanned the diner the way a paramedic scans a crash scene, taking everything in at once. Then her eyes landed on me. "Are you Miss Coralie Wren?" My hand tightened on the coffee mug. Nobody used my full name, not since the lawyer read Granny's will. "I am. My name is Eleanor Boyd. I'm an attorney with Boyd, Marsh & Associates out of Charlotte. The gentleman beside me is Special Agent Patrick Halloran with the FBI's white-collar crime unit." She paused, watching my face. "We need to speak with you before noon today. The reason we came at this hour, Miss Wren, is that federal agents are about to arrest your stepfather Roland Custer and your half-brother Bryce on charges including wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The arrests will be coordinated within the next 40 minutes. I sat down. I had to. The violin on the stool sighed under me, the way it always did. "And before we begin," she added, more gently this time, "Agent Halloran would like to ask you something. About a boy you knew. A boy named Theo 22 years ago. My name is Coralie Wren. I'm 48 years old. I want to tell you how a single bowl of chicken and dumplings turned into the strangest, most painful, most miraculous chain of events I've ever lived through. To do that, I have to take you back to the spring of 1997. I was 26 that year. I just finished my second year of nursing school at Radford when my mother died of a stroke at the kitchen table of the house she shared with my stepfather Roland. He'd married her 3 years after my father's heart gave out, and from the day he moved in, I'd felt the temperature of that house drop. He had a smile like a man who practiced it in the mirror. My mother adored him. Granny Pearl didn't trust him an inch. When Mama died, Roland inherited the house. The will was clean, dated only 6 weeks before her stroke. My half-brother Bryce, who was 19 and already starting to look at me like I was a problem to be solved, moved into my old bedroom before the funeral flowers wilted. Granny Pearl pulled me aside at the wake and said, "Honey, your mama did not write that will. I bet my own teeth on it." But she was 73, exhausted, and had no way to fight it. 6 months later, Granny passed, quietly in her bed with her hand on the Bible. She left me the Honeysuckle Kitchen, just the business. The land underneath was leased from an old man named Earl Whitaker who'd known my grandfather since the Korean War. A 50-year lease at fixed rent, signed in 1972. Granny had insisted on it. She always said, "You don't own land in this part of Virginia. You borrow it from the people who love you." I dropped out of nursing school and took over the diner. I was 27, broke, and grieving so hard some mornings I'd cry into the buttermilk while I stirred. That December was the coldest I remember. The first week of December 1997, the pipes froze twice. I was running the place alone because I couldn't afford to keep Miss Loretta on full-time anymore. One Tuesday night around 9:30, I was scraping the grill and counting the till. $83 and change. I remember because I laughed out loud at the number. $83 for a 14-hour day. Then I heard something thump against the back door. Now out behind the honeysuckle there's a gravel lot and a single dumpster, and beyond that a stand of pine trees that runs down to a creek. I figured it was a raccoon. We had a regular who came around for biscuit ends. But when I opened the back door with a broom handle, what I found wasn't a raccoon. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Skinny in that way that scared me, the kind of skinny that goes past missed meals and starts to look like something medical. He was wearing a Carolina Panthers sweatshirt 3 sizes too big, no coat, sneakers that flapped when he tried to stand up. When he saw me, he tried to run. He made it about 4 steps into the gravel before his knees buckled. I carried him inside. He weighed less than a sack of flour. I sat him at the counter and put the heater right next to his feet, and I asked him his name. Theo, he whispered. Theo Brennan. He said he'd run away from a group home down in Christiansburg 3 days earlier. He'd been sleeping in the woods, drinking from the creek, eating berries that he was pretty sure weren't going to kill him, but he wasn't certain. He picked the honeysuckle because he could smell bread. I made him chicken and dumplings from the batch I'd been planning to throw out. I warmed up 2 biscuits and put butter and sorghum on them. I poured him a glass of milk. He ate so fast I had to tell him to slow down before he made himself sick. When he was done, he just looked at the empty bowl and started crying. Quiet, no sound, just tears running off his chin into the bowl. I asked him what was wrong. He said, "Mom, that's the first hot food I've had since school let out." I let him sleep in the storage room that night. Told myself one night. But the next morning when he came out wearing a too big apron and started wiping down tables before I asked him to, something cracked open in me. That boy had a brain like nothing I'd ever encountered. By the second day, he'd memorized my entire menu, including which items I marked up the most and which ones lost me money on slow weeks. By the third day, he was correct in my register receipts. He'd watch me ring up a customer and then quietly slide a napkin across the counter with the right total written on it and an apology for the correction. He was a child. He looked like he'd been chewed on by life, but the wiring in his head was something else entirely. His parents, he told me eventually, had died in a fire when he was 4. He'd been through 6 foster placements. The last one before the group home was a man who liked to use a leather belt on Sundays after church. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. That winter, Theo became my little shadow. He had what one of my regulars, a retired librarian named Miss Roberta Dean, called an alarming memory. He could recite a phone number after seeing it once. He could tell you what Mr. Briggs ordered every Wednesday going back to the week he'd started coming. Miss Roberta brought him books from the library, novels and physics primers, and an old algebra textbook, and he ate through them like he ate that first bowl of dumplings. Meanwhile, Roland and Rice started showing up. Roland would come in around 6 in the morning, order black coffee, and stare at me over the rim of the mug. He'd ask how business was. He'd mention casually that he had a friend with the county health department who'd been wanting to do a thorough inspection. Bryce would come in later in the day, sit at the booth by the window, and just watch. Never order anything, just watch. In January, a man I'd never seen before came in and introduced himself as Dale Pritchard, a developer out of Greensboro. He offered me $18,000 cash for my lease. Said he was doing me a favor, that places like the Honeysuckle were a dying breed and I should take the money while I could. I told him no. He smiled the way Roland smiled, and he left a business card on the counter that I threw in the grease trap. That night, I started a notebook. Brown leather, the kind they sell at the Cracker Barrel for tourists. I wrote down every visit, every fake friendly threat, every weird coincidence. I dated everything. Theo saw me doing it and quietly added entries of his own, in handwriting much neater than mine, with little asterisks next to anything he thought was suspicious. Miss Roberta brought a friend in one Saturday in February, a woman named Dr. Helen Truitt, who taught psychology at Roanoke College. Dr. Truitt watched Theo for about 20 minutes. Then she pulled me aside and asked if I knew what I had on my hands. I said I had a hungry kid who was good at math. She said, "No, Mom. You have a child whose intelligence is statistically extraordinary, and he needs to be in a school that won't break him. 3 weeks later, after a lot of phone calls and a home study and a meeting I cried through, Dr. Truitt and her husband, a soft-spoken man who taught chemistry, became Theo's foster parents. They lived in Salem. They had a finished basement that they offered to turn into his bedroom. The county signed off because Theo had aged out of his last placement's tolerance anyway, and nobody wanted him back. The day Theo left, he stood in the middle of the diner and pulled a napkin out of his pocket. He'd been carrying it around for weeks. On it, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "I owe Miss Coralie Wren one hot meal of chicken and dumplings, plus interest, repayable at a fair market rate, to be determined when I am grown." Signed, Theodore James Brennan, December 9, 1997. I laughed and told him I'd frame it. He told me, very seriously, "Miss Coralie, I don't sign things I don't mean." I hugged him so hard I think I scared him. Then he got into Dr. Truitt's Subaru and they drove east on Route 11, and the diner was quiet for a long, long time. That spring, while I was cleaning out Granny Pearl's old apartment above the diner, I found a shoebox under her bed. Inside was a stack of letters Mama had written to her, plus my mother's prescription bottles from the last year of her life. And underneath all that, a small spiral notebook in Mama's handwriting. Most of it was grocery lists and recipes. But the last 12 pages were different. They were dated. They described how Roland had started giving her vitamins he picked up from a pharmacist friend in Lynchburg. They described how she'd been feeling dizzy. They described how she'd asked her own doctor about the vitamins and he told her he didn't recognize them and to please bring one in. The last entry was 3 days before her stroke. Asked Roland for the bottle. He said I'd thrown it out. I did not throw it out. It was on the dresser yesterday. I sat on Granny's faded quilt and shook for an hour. I had no proof of anything. The autopsy had said natural causes. The will had been signed. I was a 27-year-old waitress with a notebook full of paranoia and no money for a lawyer. So I put the shoebox in a safe deposit box at First National in Salem and I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. I just knew I couldn't throw it away. Roland married a woman named Vivian Pritchard in 2000. Dale Pritchard's sister. Funny how those things work out. Eviction attempt number 1 came as a wedding gift. Roland claimed Vivian had bought Earl Whitaker's land from his estate. Earl had passed in 1999. The lease should have transferred, but Roland's lawyer tried to argue that the lease had been improperly recorded. Earl's daughter, a tough woman named Marlene who lived in West Virginia, drove down to the hearing herself with the original signed copy. She slapped it on the judge's bench and said, "My daddy knew exactly what he was doing." The judge agreed. Roland lost. Vivian lost. The lease held. I started serving free coffee on the anniversary of that hearing every year. A little tradition. My regulars started calling it Marlene Day. What followed was 19 years of slow, grinding harassment. Health inspections that found violations I'd dreamed I'd cleaned up the night before. A water main accidentally cut during a county utility project that cost me 2 weeks of business. Permit applications that vanished from the courthouse. A small fire in my dumpster in 2006 that the fire marshal couldn't quite explain, but couldn't quite call us in either. A series of letters from a concerned citizens group that didn't seem to exist anywhere outside of my mailbox. I kept writing it all down. By 2012, I had 4 notebooks. By 2088, I had 7. I had regulars who became family. Mr. Buford, who'd been a county commissioner once upon a time and who watched the comings and goings at the courthouse for me. Miss Roberta, who lived to be 93 and brought me library books until the week before she died. Tate, a long-haul trucker who pulled into my lot at 4 in the morning every Tuesday and ate eggs over easy and never once tipped less than $10 on a $6 bill. And then, in the spring of 2011, the envelope started coming, plain white, no return address, postmarked from a different city every month. Inside was a money order, always made out to the Honeysuckle Kitchen, always for $12. Never a note for the first 6 months. Then, in October of 2011, a typed slip appeared with the 7th envelope. It said, From someone who remembers the dumplings. I cried into a pile of clean dish towels until my eyes were swollen shut. I knew it was him. I'd known the second I saw the first envelope, really, but I didn't reach out. I figured if he wanted me to know, he'd tell me. The money came every month for 8 years. It paid for a new compressor on the walk-in freezer. It paid for a roof patch after a windstorm in 2014. It paid the electric bill the winter the furnace died, and I had to choose between heat and payroll. Bryce got worse with age. He'd been a mean kid. He became a mean man. He ran some kind of consulting business out of Roanoke that nobody could quite describe. He started showing up at the diner 3 or 4 times a year, sitting in the booth by the window like he'd done when he was 19, just watching. Once he leaned over the counter and told me that one day, when I was finally too tired to fight, he'd buy the building and turn it into a vape shop. He laughed when he said it. I didn't. By 28, I was 47 years old. The diner was breaking even most months, losing money some. The mystery envelopes were the only reason I was still open. I'd developed arthritis in my hands from 40 years of biscuit dough. My back hurt every morning. I'd stopped dating because I didn't have the energy to explain my life to anyone new. In June of 2019, Roland's nephew, a man named Garrett who worked for the city zoning office, dropped a notice on my counter. The building had been re-evaluated. Property taxes were going up, way up. Plus, a previously unenforced ordinance about street-facing signage was suddenly being enforced, and my honeysuckle kitchen sign, which had hung there since 1962, was now in violation. Phineas started accumulating. By September, I owed the city $11,400 in back fines and adjusted taxes. By October, $19,800. The lease protected my rent. It didn't protect me from the city. I went to Wells Fargo and tried to take out a second mortgage on the diner's equipment. They turned me down. I went to a smaller bank in Salem. They turned me down too. Bryce had been busy. In late October, I got a foreclosure notice from Wells Fargo on a loan I'd taken out in 2008 to replace the HVAC system. I was current on the payments, but somehow there was a clause about material change to business operations that the bank's lawyer claimed I'd violated by reducing my hours. I hadn't reduced my hours. The fine print said something different. I called the bank's regional office. They wouldn't talk to me. I called a legal aid clinic in Roanoke. The earliest appointment was January. The foreclosure date was November 8th. I packed boxes. I wrote letters of recommendation for my 2 part-timers, a college student named Cassie and a recent widower named Mr. Halverson, who'd taken the job because his house was too quiet. I gave away the contents of my freezer to the Methodist Church food pantry. I cried for 3 days straight in early November, and then I stopped crying because there wasn't anything left. On the morning of November 7th, I came in at 4:30 like always. Made coffee, watched the sun come up over the ridge through the kitchen window, took down Granny's framed apron from above the cash register and wrapped it in tissue paper, marked the foreclosure envelope with my 9th coffee ring, and then the Lincoln pulled up out front. Miss Eleanor Boyd, attorney, was younger than me, maybe 40, maybe younger. She had a steady voice and steady hands and the kind of presence that made you sit down without being asked. Agent Halloran, FBI, looked like he'd been an offensive lineman in college and had never quite stopped carrying himself like one. But when Halloran stepped forward and took off his hat, I saw him. The eyes, same dark, watchful eyes, same way of standing with his hands at his sides, perfectly still, the way Theo used to stand by the back door waiting for me to tell him what to do next. "Miss Coralie," he said, "do you still have the napkin?" I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from going down. Agent Halloran was not Theo. Agent Halloran really was an FBI agent. But the third person who came through the door behind them, a man I hadn't even noticed because I'd been so focused on the lawyer, he was tall now. 6 foot, maybe more. He'd grown into a long, lean man with a careful smile and a haircut that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He was wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, and he had a small leather notebook in his left hand. "Hi, Miss Coralie." I made a sound that was not a word. He crossed the diner in 4 steps and caught me before my knees gave way. His name was Dr. Theodore Brennan now. He'd gone to MIT on a full ride at 16. He'd finished his bachelor's in 2.5 years and a PhD in computer science by 23. He'd founded a company in 2014 called RICO, an algorithmic platform that detected patterns of elder financial abuse for banks and credit unions. He'd sold it to a major financial services firm in early 2019 for $140 million. I'm sorry it took me this long, he said. I had to be sure I could finish it before I came back. Finish what? Them? Eleanor Boyd sat me down at the booth by the window, the one Bryce used to sit in, and laid out a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, bank records, subpoenaed emails, phone records. For the past 3.5 years, she said, Dr. Brennan's company has been working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division on a federal RICO investigation. Your stepfather, your half-brother, and a network of associates that includes Dale and Vivian Pritchard, a former county commissioner named Holcomb, and at least 11 other individuals have been running a coordinated property fraud operation across 4 states. Their pattern is consistent. They identify a vulnerable property owner, typically elderly, typically female, typically operating a small business. They harass the owner through a combination of municipal pressure, false complaints, and financial obstruction. They drive the owner to bankruptcy. They acquire the property through a shell company at a fraction of its value. They then resell, redevelop, or extract value from the property. I looked at her. How many? 31 victims that we've identified so far. We believe there are more. Your case is one of the older ones, going back over 20 years. It's also unique because of what's under your building. I blinked at her. What's under my building? She and Theo exchanged a look. Miss Coralie, he said, in 2017 I had a geological consulting firm review historical surveys of Earl Whitaker's land. There's a survey from 1981 commissioned by a mining company that never followed up, that shows your parcel sits on top of a high-quality silica deposit, the kind used in solar panel manufacturing. With current demand, the deposit is conservatively valued at $22 million. I laughed. I laughed because it was that or scream. Granny Pearl's lease, Theo continued, includes subsurface mineral rights. She got Earl Whitaker to write it in. She didn't know what was down there. She just always insisted on subsurface rights, because that's how she grew up, in coal country. As long as your lease is in force, you own those rights. Roland and Bryce have known about the silica deposit since at least 2003. We have emails. I sat with that for a minute. 21 years of harassment, 3 notebooks of evidence, my mother's death, my grandmother's worry, all of it for rocks under my floor. Eleanor opened another folder. This is harder, Miss Coralie. We have audio evidence pertaining to your mother's death. Bryce was recorded in August of this year in a private conversation at his country club describing the medication switch in detail. We have corroborating pharmacy records. The Lynchburg pharmacist Roland used, a man named Wexler, is cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. We have enough for a homicide charge against Roland and a conspiracy charge against Roland and a conspiracy charge against Rice. I had to put my forehead down on the cool laminate of the table. Theo's hand was on my back, light, not pushing. I could feel him breathing. Where is he? I whispered. Roland. He's at the Greenbrier Hotel in West Virginia, Eleanor said. He thinks he's there for a golf tournament. Bryce is at a real estate closing in downtown Roanoke. They're being arrested simultaneously in, she checked her watch, 26 minutes. Agent Halloran spoke for the first time. We secured you first, Mom, because we were concerned for your safety. We have reason to believe that once Roland and Bryce learned about the foreclosure date, they intended to pressure you into a sale this week. We didn't want you alone in this building when that happened. I sat there a long time. Theo sat next to me, not saying anything. Outside, the sky over the Blue Ridge was that particular shade of November blue that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. How did you do it? I finally asked him. He half smiled. I built a company that detects patterns. I fed it Roland and Bryce. The pattern came back loud. I started laughing again, and then I was crying, and Theo just kept his hand on my back. Wells Fargo's lawyer was on the phone within an hour. The foreclosure was withdrawn that afternoon. It turned out the material change to business operations clause had been inserted into my 2008 loan documents by a loan officer who was, surprise of surprises, related by marriage to one of Roland's associates. Wells Fargo was, very suddenly, deeply apologetic. The city's fines for my sign and my taxes evaporated over the next 48 hours. Garrett, Roland's nephew at zoning, was the seventh person arrested. He cried when they cuffed him, according to a local reporter who happened to be in the building. Roland was arrested on the 17th green at the Greenbrier. According to a member who was on the course that morning, Roland tried to run. He made it about 40 feet in golf shoes before he tripped over his own bag and ended up face down in a sand bunker. The arresting agents helped him up politely. Bryce was arrested in the conference room of a title company in downtown Roanoke. The seller, an elderly widow he was in the process of swindling, watched the entire thing and reportedly applauded. Vivian, Roland's wife, was arrested at her hairdresser's. Dale Pritchard was arrested at his country club in Greensboro. The former county commissioner was arrested at a steakhouse. The dominoes fell so fast the local paper ran out of column inches. The trial took 11 months. Roland was sentenced to 34 years in federal prison, including the homicide charge for my mother. He'll die in there. Bryce got 22 years. Vivian got 8. Dale Pritchard got 14. The county commissioner got 6. The chain of lesser players got sentences ranging from probation to 9 years. 23 people in total were convicted. I testified at 4 of the trials. I read my mother's notebook into the record at Roland's. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Margaret Indye, who was younger than me and had the kind of voice that could cut glass, told me afterward that the jury foreman had cried during my testimony. The Silica Rights settled out of court with a clean energy company based in North Carolina. The number was a little higher than the original estimate. I kept $3 million, paid off every debt I'd ever had, fixed Granny Pearl's old apartment upstairs so I could actually live in it, and put the rest into a foundation. Theo helped me set it up. We called it the Pearl Wren Fund. It pays legal fees for elderly small business owners who are being pushed out of their properties. In the first 3 years, we funded 48 cases. We've won 41 of them. The diner stayed open. We expanded into the empty unit next door and added a small library and tutoring space for kids in the trailer park up the road. Miss Roberta would have loved it. We named it after her. Theo flies in once a month from Boston. He has a wife now, a research scientist named Priya, and a daughter named Pearl who is 3 and already correcting my math when I let her ring up customers. The first time she did it, I sat down on a stool and laughed until I couldn't breathe. The napkin is framed behind the register now. Theo's 8-year-old handwriting, plus interest, repayable at a fair market rate. He paid that back about 1,000 times over, but I'm not going to be the one to tell him to stop. In November of 2022, 3 years to the day after Eleanor Boyd walked through my front door, I was closing up alone. It was cold out, that mountain cold that gets into your bones. I was wiping down the counter and listening to the heater rattle when I heard something at the back door. I knew before I opened it. I just knew. She was about 10. Hair in a tangled braid, no coat, sneakers with no socks. Her name was Junie. She'd run from a relative she didn't want to talk about yet. She'd walked along Route 11 for 2 days, sleeping in a bus shelter and a barn. I made her chicken and dumplings. She ate 2 bowls and then asked me, in the smallest voice I've ever heard, why I was being nice to her. I told her the truth. I told her that somebody was nice to me once, a long time ago, when I was scared and didn't know what was coming next, and that she'd just walked into a kitchen where being nice to scared kids was the whole entire point. She lives with a foster family in Salem now. Good people. She comes to the diner after school on Wednesdays. She's not a genius like Theo. She's just a girl. She likes horses and she's terrible at fractions and she laughs at her own jokes before she finishes telling them. She's perfect. Granny Pearl used to say you don't own the land, you borrow it from the people who love you. I think she meant more than the dirt. I think she meant the whole thing, the diner and the recipes and the second chances and the small acts of feeding people who are hungry. You don't own any of it. You just hold it for a while and then you pass it on. The sign above the register hasn't changed since 1962. It still says the honeysuckle kitchen, pull up a chair. Underneath it now, in a flame, is the napkin. And underneath the napkin, a smaller note in Junie's handwriting dated last Christmas that says, I owe Miss Coralie one bowl of dumplings. I'll pay her back when I'm grown. Joni M., I'm going to frame that one too. I've thought a lot, in the years since that November morning, about why some lives bend toward kindness and others bend the other way. I don't believe in fate. I think we are the sum of the small choices we make when nobody is watching, the ones we don't even notice we're making. The night I opened the back door of the honeysuckle kitchen and found Theo huddled by the dumpster, I had $83 in my register and no plan for the morning. I could have called the sheriff. I could have told myself it wasn't my problem. Nobody would have blamed me. But I'd been raised by a woman who fed people because feeding people was the only honest answer she had to a world that hurt them. So I made a bowl of dumplings. That was the choice. Everything else, the 22 years that followed, the silica deposit, the federal trial, the Pearl Wren fund, all of it grew from that one small thing. And Roland and Bryce, on the other side of the ledger, made their own small choices. A pill switched on a dresser, a signature forged on a will, a health inspector called as a favor. None of it looked like much at the time. But cruelty compounds the way kindness does. They thought they were getting away with something for 21 years. What they were really doing was building, brick by brick, the case that would put them in federal prison until they died. I don't want anyone watching this to think the lesson is that good people always win. We don't, not always, and not on any timeline that makes sense. Granny Pearl didn't live to see Roland in cuffs. My mother didn't live at all. There is no version of the story where I get her back. What I do believe is that the way you treat people who can't pay you back is the truest measurement of who you are. Theo couldn't pay me back at 9 years old. He had nothing. The math of it didn't work. But he had a mind that noticed things, and he noticed that somebody had treated him like he mattered, and he carried that with him into every classroom and every line of code he ever wrote. Be honest, even when it cost you. Use your mind. Read the books. Learn the law. Keep the notebook. I kept 7 of them and they helped put a murderer away. Stupidity is expensive, and Roland and Rice were stupid in the deepest sense because they thought nobody was paying attention. And keep going. That's the hardest one. There were mornings in 2015 and 2017 when I almost quit. I didn't because Tate the trucker tipped $10 on a $6 bill, and Mr. Halverson needed somewhere to be at 5 in the morning, and somebody, somewhere, was still mailing me an envelope every month with no name on it. You don't always know who's watching. You don't always know what your small kindness is becoming in someone else's life. Make it anyway. Feed the hungry kid. Write it down. Keep going. That, I believe, is the only thing worth teaching.